ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس لعلهم يتذكرون. ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس لعلهم يتذكرون.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome to another episode of Amthal al-Quran, Quranic Parables, where we each night throughout Ramadan we go through a parable of the Quran. And if you have missed the previous parables, you can always catch up on the Quranic Parables page, which I've created and listed all the previous ones. So welcome once again. And just before we start, give us some thumbs up, like, so that we know that you can actually hear us and see us and the broadcast is working all good. And also share the broadcast with your friends and family. As usual, I have with me my good friend, Ustad Saf. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
How are you?
You're right, Ustad.
Alhamdulillah, good, mashallah. I think we are alive, alhamdulillah, good. So as usual, brothers and sisters, we have a narration or two about some of the virtues of the Quran before we actually go into our Amthal of the day. So Ustad Saf, do you have anything for us to contemplate on whilst before we start?
Right, so I've got a hadith. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi man wala. Assalamu alaikum to all our viewers. Okay, so here's a narration that's found in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. It's in the Shu'ab al-Iman of Imam al-Bayhaqi. It's in the Musannaf of Abd al-Razaq. And the hadith is from Abu Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala an, that he says, من استمع إلى آية من كتاب الله تعالى كتب له حسنة مضاعفة ومن تلا آية من كتاب الله كانت له نورا يوم القيامة. Then we have a variation of that, and I'll translate, من استمع آية من كتاب الله تعالى كانت له نورا يوم القيامة. So in this narration, which I just mentioned now, read out, it says, من استمع إلى آية من كتاب الله, whoever listens to one ayah from the blessed book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will write for them hasana muda'afa, multiple rewards for listening to that blessed ayah. And whoever recites an ayah, just an ayah, man tala ayatan min kitabillah, whoever recites one verse from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, كانت له نورا يوم القيامة, he will have a light for him on the day of judgment, بإذن ta'ala. So this is a narration, and there are other wordings of it. من قرأ من كتاب الله كان له درجة في الجنة ومصباحا من النور. So whoever recites from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will have a rank in paradise, and they will have lamps of light. So even if we can't during the day, whether for whatever reason, whether we're busy or not, just try and attempt one ayah a day and look at the ajr Allah has kept for us out of his reward, even if it's just an ayah.
Alhamdulillah, barakallah feek. I come across a narration of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh in Sahih al-Bukhari, which is an interesting narration. He said, كيف تسألون أهل الكتاب عن كتبهم وعندكم كتاب الله أقرب الكتب أحدا بالله تقرؤون تقرؤونه محضا لم يشب. How can you ask the people of the book about their books while you have Allah's book, which is the most recent of books revealed by Allah, and you read it and it is pure and undistorted in its form? So this is a beautiful statement of Ibn Abbas talking about referring to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exclusively as our reference point. And this is the latest and the final testament from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's another beautiful narration. Barakallahu feek, brothers and sisters, if you are just joining us, we just mentioned a couple of narrations about the virtues of the Quran, and by all means, if you know any good narrations or hadith or statements of the companions about the virtues of the Quran, put it into the comments so that we all can benefit, inshallah ta'ala. So tonight, let's go to the amthal of the night. Let me just share the screen and then we can crack on with it, inshallah. So tonight, the amthal that we have is from Surah Al-Ankabut, the surah which is titled The Spider. And the reason why it is titled as such is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives us an example, a parable about the spider, which we're going to discuss tonight. So let's just listen to the recitation first, and then we can go into the detail, inshallah ta'ala.
مثل الذين اتخذوا من دون الله أولياء كمثل العنكبوت اتخذت بيتا وإن أوهن البيوت لبيت العنكبوت لو كانوا يعلمون.
صدق الله العظيم. So in the translation of this verse is the example of those who take allies other than Allah is like that of the spider who takes a home. And indeed, the weakest of homes is the home of the spider, if they only knew. Surah 29, verse 41. And I mean, when I just read this verse, the incredible eloquence of this amthal is astounding, really, in terms of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is depicting the example of those who take allies other than Allah, comparing it to a spider who takes a home, i.e. a spider's web, and it's the weakest of homes. So this is an incredible ayah, inshallah. So let's go to our next slide, and then we can go into a bit more detail and see what are the lessons that we can actually learn from this. So in this slide, you can see I've got a couple of images. One at the top, a spider's web, a home of a spider. And then, I've got some images of, statues and idols. Because
that statue and idol picture, Ustaz, has made it quite a few appearances now, hasn't it?
It has. It's become quite famous, hasn't it? Yeah. So here, obviously, the comparison is being made between those who take other than Allah as an awliya is compared to a spider who takes, his takes the spider's web as his own home. So that's the comparison that's being made. So we are back to our standard format of the tashbih, of the simile. So we have our likened to simile elements and simile feature. In the previous, I think, previous two, there were not explicit parables. They were implicit. Yeah. There were what we call isti'ara, where the traditional pattern of a tashbih wasn't applicable, but now we are back to our standard format. So let's dive into the basic structure first, and then we can go into some of the benefits. Ustaz Saf, should we just dive into it, inshallah?
As Ustaz mentioned, we're back to our simile format. So the likened, so the mushabbah, it's good that Ustad has taken out the Arabic transliteration. By now, I think our viewers will be familiar now with the terms, we hope. So the mushabbah are those, mathalul ladhina. So the alladhina are those, referring back to, in the previous verse, the mushrikun, or the non-believers. So they are the mushabbah. The Ustad has highlighted it in red. The mushabbah bihi, what is it that the mushrikun or the non-Muslims, the kuffar, what are they compared to or likened to? They're likened to a spider that weaves its web. So spider web, or a spider who takes its home by weaving its web. Al-ankabut ittakhadhat baytan. Right, so that's the likened to, that's the mushabbah bihi. And I think again you'd be familiar now with our simile element. So مثل الذي اتخذت من دون الله أولياء كمثل العنكبوت اتخذت بيتا وإن أوهن البيوت لبيت العنكبوت ولو كانوا يعلمون. So كمثل, that was Ustad highlighted it in blue. Excuse me. And the wajhu shaba, or the simile feature, is referring to da'af, like weakness, futility, lack of permanence. And the clue is in there when Allah says, وَإِنَّ أَوْهَنَ الْبُيُوتِ لَبَيْتُ الْعَنْكَبُوتِ. And surely the most flimsiest and weakest of abodes or residences is that of the spider. It spins its web with all the effort it takes to spin its web, and then, a slight touch or something, whether a flame or even any object, just breaks the web apart. لو كانوا يعلمون. Again, if only people, they knew when they reflect on this method. But we want to be people who reflect on these parables. So okay, so that's the sort of components done there in a summary. So what does مثل الذين اتخذوا من دون الله أولياء mean? So some of the mufassirun, they said that this means يعني الآلهة من الأصنام والأوثان عبدوها. So Imam al-Mawardi says it can refer to the statues. Obviously, remember the audience, the immediate audience are the Arabs and what they did and who they took as their protectors. Their people who they saw as giving them succor, refuge, giving them support, power, patronage. They believe that their idols and statues did that. So that's one meaning of the deities and idols. But their worshipping of them, Allah tells us, is like as if, their worshipping of them gives them no benefit. So أنهم عبدوا ما لا يغني عنهم شيئا كبيت العنكبوت الذي لا يدفع شيئا وهو من أبلغ الأمثال فيهم. So Allah strikes the most beautiful and powerful imagery. Look, you going to others for your protection, whether that's idols or, as we'll see, any other limited finite power, you go to that for your protection. That is irrational logic, and it just doesn't make sense, because to do that is to try and protect yourself behind a spider's web. That's not going to protect you from anything. So the gharad, the aim behind this tashbih, is Allah showing how obviously destructive and dangerous, how flimsy kufr is, and the basis of kufr, but how dangerous the idea is of trying to seek protection in other than Allah. Allah's trying to show how they're so irrational in their judgment, so foolish in praying to idols and deities, whatever that might be, astral deities or whatever. This is just makes no rational sense, and it's just as silly as someone trying to take protection from behind a spider's web. So those are some of the sort of tafsir points in brief strokes.
Alhamdulillah. I mean, the verses, which couple of verses after that, or the verse following it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allah ya'lamu ma yad'una min dunihi min shay, wa huwa al-azizul hakim. And indeed, Allah knows whatever thing they call upon other than Him, and He is exalted in might, al-aziz. I mean, contrasting with what wa inna awhana al-buyut, the weakness, Yeah, contrasting with the might and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, and he's also Al-Hakim, the one who's full of wisdom, as opposed to being foolish. So there's a beautiful contrast that's being made. And then the verse afterwards, we've cited this verse, وَتِلْكَ الْأَمْثَالُ نَضْرِبُهَا لِلنَّاسِ وَمَا يَعْقِلُوهَا إِلَّا الْعَالِمُونَ. And these examples we present to the people, but no one will understand them except those who have ilm, those who have knowledge. So this mathal is very vivid and pictorial. I mean, you can see on the images that if you look at a spider's house, if you just contemplate on that, if you just look at that image, it lacks any protection whatsoever from anything. I mean, anything could actually destroy it. The smallest of thing can actually destroy it. It's not safe from the environment, safe from wind and weather and so forth. It's the most frailest of house, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is comparing that to obviously in this case the mushrikeen taking idols as their ally, as their patron, as their friend, as their protector, to serve them, to help them, to look after them, and it's being compared being as frail and weak as the weakest of homes, which is the house of a spider.
But remember, this is a beautiful story. Sorry for cutting you off there, but this is again go back to our what we mentioned at the very first session. I think it was we did before Ramadan started. That this is what makes a mathal powerful. It doesn't need to be. You don't need to say it out in so many words. It's so to the point. Remember what a tashbih is. It's a comparison. Tashbihu shay'un ma'qul bi shay'in mahsus. Something understood with something tangible. See, we know what kufr is. We know what shirk is. We know what that is. But Allah then tells us, right, I'll make that thing tangible for you by comparing it to a spider's web. And it's such a base. It's just you just think, well, yeah, that's just so simple, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, you take something abstract or conceptual and just give it a comparison to an everyday thing that everyone can sense, and before you know it, people get it. I get it. I understand. It makes sense. So that's, I guess, that is the power of parables, is that actually you don't have to philosophize and you don't have to make things really complicated. You just get to the point and people can appreciate it. And if you present this argument to somebody, then it's obvious. People are not going to argue with that, as long as they apply their thinking to this, because the verses we mentioned afterwards, وَمَا يَعْقِلُوهَا إِلَّا الْعَالِمُونَ, and only people who have knowledge can understand it. It's interesting, actually. I'm just thinking on the term وَمَا يَعْقِلُوهَا إِلَّا الْعَالِمُونَ. Aql and ilm is used in that verse. So only those who have knowledge can intellectually comprehend it, meaning that there is something for us to really think about deeply about when we are referring to anything other than Islam, anything other than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent down in terms of the Quran, sending of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sunnah and so forth. And this is a very important point for us to start thinking about when we, especially living in a world where there are so many, I mean, we don't live in a world where, physical idols dominate the lives of people necessarily in every aspect of life, but we have other idols, if you like, other beliefs and other ways of life. And I think the verses, did not even spell out specifically to say, this is asnam. It says, مثل الذين اتخذوا من دون الله أولياء, anything other than Allah. So it includes idols as well as other things other than idols as well.
So a wali is something that ينفعك بالنصرة والدفاع وجلب الخير. So a wali is someone who gives you help, isn't it? Assistance, protection, gives you support. So, they thought they can get that from these idols.
And that's been contrasted with that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's the wali of the believers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Baqarah, he says, Allahu waliyul ladhina amanu yukhrijuhum min adh-dhulumati ila an-nur. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's the wali, the protector, the guardian, the defender, the helper of those who believe, يخرجوهم من الظلمات إلى النور. He takes them from the darkness to the light. And then Allah mentions والذين كفروا أولياؤهم الطاغوت يخرجونهم من النور إلى الظلمات. And as for the disbelievers, those disbelievers, their awliya, their supporters are taghut, false gods and deities and so forth. And what do? يخرجونهم من النور إلى الظلمات. They do the opposite. They take you from the light to the darkness. And they are أولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون. They are the companions of the hellfire, and they'll reside there in it forever. So we have this contrast of the disbelievers who they take as their awliya, and who the believers should take as their awliya. Let's look at the next slide, inshallah, and see what lessons we can learn. I'll just share that with everybody else. There we go. So I've got some summary points on here, Ustaz. So point one, I think this is a quote from, I just put it up there, from Ibn Atiyah, from his tafsir, Al-Muharrar Al-Wajiz. It says, and I think we've kind of talked about this. Allah most blessed likens the non-believers in their worship of idols and erecting all their affairs on that basis, like a spider's effort in spinning its web. The slightest touch of a flame destroys it. So this is really the essence of this parable. And some few other points for us to kind of think about, point to allies other than Allah.
That's right.
Our idols, ideologies, thoughts, and systems. And one of the key things I think is coming clear is that because the direct audience of the Quran, especially the Meccan Quran, where a lot of the parables are, is the idol worshippers of Mecca, the pagan Quraysh. And I think, for Muslims, we need to appreciate shirk and disbelief in all of its forms. That's a really important point. It's not just, Hubal and Lat and Manat and all the other idols, which these ayats are applicable to or restricted to, but rather there just happens to be the dominant beliefs at the time, which the Quran came to address. And I think this point of us being able to relate this Quran, relate these verses to the modern contemporary world that we live in, and identifying what is the modern day Allah, what is the modern day Hubal, what is the modern day idols, which people has taken their awliyas, like, and it's really frail and weak, like a spider's web. So that's an important point. There's a question that comes to mind. Why is it so difficult for some Muslims to kind of break out of that mold and start kind of looking at the world and saying, right, we don't actually have Hubal and Manat and Uzza and others, dominating the life of the people and it's the center point, but we have other ideologies. That's something. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Why people only look at the ayah in the context of
just referring to idols and just restricting it, and they can't seem to apply that to the modern day reality.
But we know there's a general principle, isn't it? We want to try al-ibra la bi khusus al-sabab, al-ibra bi umum al-lafz la bi khusus al-sabab. So the point is we want to always try and not restrict the verse to the very reason why it came down only. but we look to the generality of its words. Whatever fits the meaning of awliya these days.
Yes.
You know, it might just not be Ganesh or some other idol. Do you know what I mean? There could be institutions as such or ideas. But yeah, it's. I'm not sure. It could be that point that I mentioned there. People are not aware that the Quran is not. Our scholars had principles in place that allowed us to not restrict the ayahs to just one particular context.
Incident.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that could be one. The other thing is maybe people haven't thought about it in that context. The Quran, maybe they haven't been able to link these ayat to the present context. And it's not always easy to actually do that. So we might miss that point. It might escape under our radar when we're trying to think about these things. So this is how we need to connect the Book of Allah to our realities.
I mean, today, in terms of like, you know,
the other thing,
the Muslim world, our take a reliance or who we take as allies in terms of whether institutions or whether ideas. I mean, IMF, World Bank, you know, these institutions, they have great influence in the Muslim lands, or who we ally with in terms of from the enemies of Islam. You know, we find many of the Muslim countries, you know, they are politically, militarily have alliances and allies with America, Europe, and various different countries. And that seems to be the norm. And we've seen the consequence of that. We've built our way of life based on those alliances in our countries, whether, you know, politics, economics, social affairs. And we see how fragile our societies are. You know, as Allah mentions, you know, here, وَإِنَّ أَوْهَنَ الْبُيُوتِ لَبَيْتُ الْأَنْقَبُوتِ. Our countries are very fragile. They lack any strength or any independence. And so this ayah, it really resonates with me in that sense that, you know, it's not just about idols, but it's about, in the Muslim world, our political, intellectual direction is reliant on the Western way of life and Western, you know, hegemony in the world.
That's right. I mean, this is why maybe sometimes we might not be able to see the Quran in that way, because the existing structures, by the world order, the structures that it's built on, the institutions, the ideas, the status quo that the world order is built on, we just seem like we're so part of it. It's hard to step out of it to critique it. Can you see? So, you know, it's hard to look at it from an alternative perspective. But yeah, but we need to, as Muslims, because we have our own way of looking, how we have our own worldview. We have our own system with our own institutions that's built on a independent foundation. And some of the amthal we've been going through, we've been highlighting that as we've been going along. So the reason why perhaps we might not be able to make that connection is we're looking at it from within the status quo perspective. We can't imagine it. We can't imagine a system without the World Bank or the IMF or, you know, or America or, you know, capitalism.
That's a really interesting point, because just thinking about this particular verse, not only is this verse, you know, showing how was directly is critiquing. This verse is actually critiquing the belief system of Quraysh by bringing this analogy, or bringing this amthal and showing its weakness. And I think there is a lesson here for Muslims, is to say, look, you know, anything other than Islam, any other way of life other than Islam, you know, I think one of our viewers mentioned, you know, this verse is like an apt description of capitalism, right? So whether we're talking about capitalism or democracy or the liberal Enlightenment philosophies, etc., there is a Muslim's got to start critiquing those ideologies to show their frailties and their weaknesses and how they are not fit for purpose for human beings to live by. So this is giving us another dimension here, I think, which is that, you know, as Muslims, part of being a Muslim is that we have to criticize and show the defects and the contradictions in the kufr system. And that's kind of built into our creed anyway. La ilaha illallah. You negate something. There's nothing worthy of worship. Then you say, except Allah. There is none to be followed except Allah. There's no wali for the believer except Allah. So there is an important point, I think, here, which is, Muslims, yes, we got to believe in Islam, and we at the same time, we have to, as part of our da'wah, as part of enjoining good, forbidding munkar, we have to also show the weakness and the corruption of other systems. I mean, that's a general principle, and of course, each of those systems, they'll have their own unique criticism. So capitalism will have its own criticism. Socialism will have its own respective criticism, or secularism, etc. Because kufr comes in all forms and shapes, and we as Muslims have got to be, aware of them and criticize them intellectually to show why they don't deserve to be followed or to be believed in. Any other points?
No, I think no. Those are very important points. Jazakallah khair.
Barakallah feek. Okay, brothers and sisters, this was again another wonderful example of the amthal of the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he compared those who take other than Allah as their awliya, other than taking Allah as their Lord, taking Islam as their deen, taking Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as their prophet. I like spiders. I like spiders who take, their web as their own homes, and that is the weakest of homes, as Allah mentions, wa inna awhana al-buyuti la baytul anqabut law kanu ya'lamun. And indeed, the weakest of homes is the homes of the spiders, only if they knew, only if they think and thought and pondered. So barakallah feek for joining us tonight, and inshallah ta'ala we will return tomorrow with another amthal from me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
ويضرب الله الأمثال للناس لعلهم يتذكرون